While she was daydreaming, the girl's old memories resurface. Like all old memories, the colors have faded significantly. Still, she gathers each scene together to reminisce. In those old memories, the three siblings held hands while taking an excursion to the Hill of Blooming Flowers. Arwen, Tanya, and someone she used to fear and hate. Maybe it can be called the last memory when the three of them were together. From there on, Tanya's life was filled with so much burden and responsibility. It turns out that such happy days had existed in her life. Tanya looked sad and nostalgic when thinking about it, but such a life seemed impossible to repeat in her life now. When Tanya opened her eyes and looked out the window, a chaotic scene was then seen in her eyes. It was the scene of the Sylvania students who were demonstrating in front of her residence and told her to resign from the student council president candidate. Seeing that, Tanya wondered why this could happen. Meanwhile, in Ed's hiding place, in contrast to the chaotic atmosphere in front of the royal family's private dormitory, it's very peaceful here with the clear sky clearly visible above. Ed seemed to have guessed Tanya's current situation. He wondered, should I help Tanya who was cornered, or should I leave it alone? For Ed, this felt as if he was twisting the plot of the scenario with his own hands, and it made him hesitate, especially when there were already various deviant events that had no known cause. With weapons in their hands, Ed and Zix were preparing for sparring now. Seeing Zix with a great sword in his hand, Ed then thought, he is Taylor's loyal friend, the strongest among the second-year students, if you exclude Lucy, but due to fatigue and compatibility issues, in the original scenario, he was originally destined to lose to Wade, but the current Zix is different from the original scenario. Just as the sparring started, Zix then strongly swung his great sword which produced a strong gust of wind that hit Ed's direction. It was Zix's attack skill called Single Strike. Seeing the attack, Ed immediately became alert. He also decided to check something now, a small detail but hard to miss. The attack that Zix threw was so strong that it seemed to split the ground it passed through. Ed exhaled for a moment seeing that, the thing that was above all this, the thing that deviated the most from the scenario, that thing was none other than his own strength. He decided to see how strong he was now. Ed immediately cast basic defensive magic to block the attack that Zix threw, but, although he managed to block the attack, he was then surprised, when he saw Zix who suddenly appeared in front of him. He was surprised by how fast he was confused why he could move that fast. Even so, Ed did not panic, because Zix went too deep. He decided to take advantage of this. Seeing Ed who retreated backwards, Zix was about to chase him, but he was then surprised by what he saw in front of him. It was a dagger that had been implanted with a spirit formula. Zix realized that avoiding this would not be easy, and when Ed said mug, a very powerful explosion then emerged from the dagger. While Ed was admiring his masterpiece, he was then surprised when he saw a figure that emerged from the explosion. He knew it was Zix, but he was confused and surprised by what he saw now. From within the explosion, Zix moved towards him with a very strange movement that left an after-image behind him. That unnatural movement, a bad feeling appeared in Ed's heart when he saw that. He then immediately took back his dagger, and swung his dagger towards Zix. He had a guess what happened to Zix now. Seeing Ed who was attacking towards him, Zix then casually stepped back to avoid his attack. His movements looked so natural and easy when doing so. The reason why Zix could do that was because he was using psychokinesis magic on his body right now. It was a magic that allowed users to manipulate objects by using mana. Ed's face looked incredulous when he saw that. He was really shocked to see Zix move his body by using psychokinesis magic in the middle of a fight. Even though he had a proper understanding of his physical and magical abilities, it was not a movement that could be imitated by just anyone. To do this, what was needed was not only theoretical knowledge, but also senses honed through real combat. While Ed was in shock of what he was doing, Zix then cast an intermediate magic, Ice Spear, and threw it at him, but Ed luckily managed to step back in time and managed to avoid the attack. He felt that Zix was really merciless, but what made him feel doubtful was, Zix should have realized that he could definitely avoid this. This made him think that this was just a bait, a setup for casting a greater spell, a ploy to buy time for chanting. Realizing that, Ed then stopped and asked him, "Didn't you say this was just a light spar?" Hearing that, Zix said that he originally thought that too. His original intention was just to use one sword, but apparently, Zix then threw away his great sword, and cast an advanced magic, high-level mana armament. He asked him, isn't sparring supposed to be like a real fight? After that, the intensity of the sparring between the two of them then rose to another level. Janica herself was surprised when she saw that, but Janica knew that it was harmless to Ed, so she wasn't that worried. She then focused back on her cooking. She was cooking a curry at the moment. She put a carrot into the curry, but she was a little hesitant. Is this okay? She didn't know. She could only hope that Ed would like it. After the sparring was over, they would definitely be hungry, so Janica thought she'd better finish her cooking as soon as possible. The intensive battle between the two of them was really powerful that it caused the ground where they were to be destroyed everywhere, but Zix seemed to have the upper hand in the sparring, because Ed seemed to be overwhelmed in deflecting every attack he threw. Zix attacked him repeatedly, which made him constantly retreat. Even the basic defensive magic he cast could not withstand the impact of the attacks that Zix threw repeatedly. After finally getting a little space, Ed then created a water arrow, and shot 3 water arrows at him, but his shots could be easily blocked by Zix and seemed to have no impact. Mana armament literally turns the user's mana into weapons. Most mages have no reason to use such a varied arsenal, that's why they don't bother using this difficult advanced magic. Therefore, Zix is arguably the only mage who can use almost every weapon without restriction. This is Zix's signature magic, although his attacks can be blocked easily by Zix, but Ed is not discouraged and continues to shoot at Zix continuously using water arrows. But, when Ed was about to shoot at Zix with water arrows again, he was then surprised when he saw him suddenly appear behind him. He cursed. He realized that Zix was using psychokinesis. Again, Zix in that mode is really troublesome. Besides being difficult to follow, his movements are also difficult to predict. Seeing Zix who suddenly pulled out a rapier and thrust it at him, Ed could only helplessly watch it without being able to do anything. His current position did not allow him to dodge or block the attack, but fortunately, before Zix's attack could land, the blessing of the windstorm then activated. A gust of wind in the shape of a beast appeared around Ed, and created a powerful blast of wind that gushed from its mouth. It managed to stop Zix's pace, and made him retreat backwards, but Ed's attack did not stop there. He then splashed water towards Zix that formed a puddle. Looking at the puddle below, Zix was then shocked. He was confused since when did Ed do this? It was not an ordinary puddle, it was a spirit technique called Water's Grace Manifestation. Just as Zix stepped on the puddle, the environment around him suddenly changed, as if he was transported to another world. Not only that, the puddle around him suddenly showed movement, and changed its shape into a water lioness. Feeling the water lioness pounce from behind him, Zix didn't show any panic expression at all. He then strongly stomped on the water lioness, which instantly destroyed it, but, while his attention was distracted by the water lioness, Zix was then surprised when he saw Ed, who appeared next to him and launched an attack on him. As Ed clenched his fist, a very powerful explosion then appeared which made Zix bounce back. The intensity of the fight between the two of them seemed to be really fierce and not like a sparring but a real fight. Ed even looked bloody at this time. After his battle with Zix, Ed felt that Zix was indeed a tough opponent. If he had mastered the mana armament, it meant that he had grown enough just like in the original scenario. He was quite relieved about that, because it meant that Taylor and others would have no problems when dealing with enemies in future acts. But, when Ed felt that victory was in his hands, he was then surprised by what he saw. Zix actually managed to survive the explosion he created and was still able to stand. After coughing for a moment, Zix said that he was really tough. He then reused psychokinesis on his body, which made his body float. With a sharp gaze directed at him, Zix said it seemed like he must not let his guard down. Zix seemed to decide to exert all his strength at this time. It could be seen from how powerful the mana flow surrounding him at this time. With a cruel smile and a sharp beast-like gaze, Zix said that he would be serious from now on. Right after he said that, Zix then used the advanced mana armament, Condense. Suddenly, the mana flow around him went to a point and condensed into a ball shape. Ed felt panicked seeing that. He realized the gravity of the situation. He then immediately told Leisha to stop Zix's attack. But, when Leisha rushed forward and tried to stop Zix's attack, she hadn't even gotten close before her body was torn apart by the strong gust of wind surrounding Zix's body. Ed was stunned to see that. He now realized, now is the early chapters of Act 3, and the ability that Zix showed in this sparring was his maximum ability that he could imagine in this scenario. Ed did not expect to see it so soon. In the original scenario, in Chapter 7 Act 4, Failed Swordsman of Sylvania, Zix's final fighting style was shown during the infiltration of Gregel Cathedral. Spear of Flora, that was the name of the technique Zix was currently using. With a long spear in his hand, he looked like an angel of death who would reap the lives of sinners. Zix realized, rather than doing clumsy mind games, exerting overwhelming power was the most appropriate way to deal with a typical person like him. After that, Zix then controlled the swords floating around him and showered Ed with them. Ed immediately felt nervous seeing that. He then used focused explosion again to stop the speed of the swords. His actions did succeed in stopping the speed of some of the flying swords, but the swords continued to rain on him as if endless. It made his mana depleted. Focused explosion is a magic that wastes mana, but unfortunately he has no other choice now. Ed is also aware that this is just an appetizer. The problem is, the second attack, seeing that his attack has not succeeded in knocking Ed down. Zix then increased the intensity of his attacks and again showered Ed with those flying swords. Seeing that, Ed immediately put up a defensive stance, and again cast basic defensive magic. It successfully blocked the attacks that Zix threw. Even so, Ed realized that this was only a temporary solution. He then took out a magic engineering item called Shock Enhanced Wave Sphere. Seeing that, Zix even felt happy. He realized, if he had to take out magic engineering item at a time like this, it meant that his mana was exhausted. Zix felt that victory was in sight and increased the intensity of his attacks. Zix personally rushed forward and attacked him using the long spear in his hand, but, when his attack was about to hit Ed, Zix was then shocked and confused when his pace suddenly stopped. Seeing a speck of light in Ed's hand and the strong wind that protected his surroundings, Zix wondered, is it wind magic? He was confused why Ed could use it without mana. Ed sighed for a moment. He then said to him, "If you attack with full power, then inevitably I must also do the same." Ed realized that he could not lose access to mana for a long time like that time, so, he then took out the legendary grade magic engineering item, Glast's Golden Phoenix Ring. He will release a sufficient amount of mana, a sufficient amount to manifest her. Ed focused himself and put all his energy into the summoning, until finally the summoning was successful. He could finally breathe a sigh of relief now, but, unlike the big wolf as he imagined, what came out was instead a beautiful girl with shimmering silver hair. The girl was surprised that he was able to summon her without any replacement altar or mana supply from Janica or Lucy. She felt that his growth was really impressive. Looking at the beautiful girl in front of him, Ed incredulously muttered, "Marilda,